We are back with the BMW iX1 eDrive 20 today, and we're talking exclusively about efficiency of this car. We're going to look at the minimum consumption, we're going to talk about average, how it compares with what the community achieves, and we're going to talk about range as a result of that efficiency and how it compares to EV database. Then we are going to compare to the Ioniq EV, the best in class for efficiency, and also to the Kona EV, because we got good stats on that one too. Finally, we'll take a look at what these measures mean for your wallet. Is it a big factor? Let's go. So we are getting into the BMW iX1 eDrive 20, 19-inch wheels. It's winter now, we are in the UK, and the first question is, what is the best efficiency we can achieve? Let's look at that. 151 watt-hours per kilometer, or 4.1 miles per kilowatt hours. That's the best we have seen over a few days of testing this car. Now, it's when there was 10 degrees Celsius, which was more than the rest of the time, and I was on a short commute to work and back, 30 minutes. How does that compare to the Ioniq, the king of efficiency? If you look at the average consumption to do the exact same trip at different times in the year for the Ioniq, you can see 3.8 miles per kilowatt hours in February, and then 4.1 in March, and then 4.8 in April. I think what that shows is that the iX1 may be in a different league and therefore less efficient, but not disproportionately so for such work commutes. The whole point of this video is to give more information about the iX1 if you're considering purchasing or leasing it. So for anyone with this car already, please do add comments below. What is your efficiency? How do you use it? What are your overall stats? I'm sure that will become quite handy to anyone checking out this video. And of course, do the infamous like and subscribe if you feel like it. It's now time to talk about average consumption over 600 kilometers and just a couple of days. Not massive in terms of amounts of stat, but good mix in terms of urban, suburban, motorway, headwind, tailwind, a bit of a mix. Again, in winter from, let's say, 5 to 10, 12 degrees Celsius. What we've got is 184 watt-hours per kilometer. That's 3.4 miles per kilowatt hours. And if you drill down a bit more in the details and look at individual stretches, you can see that you're typically between the 3 and 4 miles per kilowatt hours depending on conditions. One thing that was quite obvious is that the headwind on the motorway, so at faster speeds, clearly it's taking its toll, but otherwise it's not too bad on efficiency. In fact, it's reasonable. Again, not a very light car and this big boxy shape. Now let's look at what others achieve with this same car. We got this car with nearly 2,000 kilometers. It was driven by others and they had achieved 198 watt-hours per kilometer since factory reset. So that's 3.1 miles per kilowatt hours. It's not great at all. And then if you look at what the community had achieved at the time, it was 214 watt-hours per kilometer. That's 2.9 miles per kilowatt hours. So even worse. Now we're looking at numbers that are not very good at all. And that could be also a function of the type of drivers. Clearly, I try to have a slightly lighter foot. So what does that mean for range now? Well, the drivable capacity to 0% from 100% is 59.3 kilowatt hours. That's what I measured. And I invite you to take a look at how I go about measuring that. That's super simple. In fact, I invite you to submit your own measurements for any EV with the link below. I think what that means is this car has quite a bit of room beyond 0% because the battery is larger than that. So typically we are looking at 190 to 200 real miles of range in winter and with a potential of 240 miles, with the worst case at the 150 miles. If you now compare to EV database, it's broadly in the same range, although of course there's always the question of which numbers you want to look at, because we are somewhere between cold and mild weather, and it's also somewhere between highway and combined on this occasion. And considering how people use their cars, either in the UK or elsewhere, which is typically 10-mile trips and no more per day, well, of course, this is plenty of range for anyone that can charge reasonably conveniently. It's now time to compare to the king of efficiency, the Ioniq 28 kilowatt hours, and also to compare to the Kona 19-inch wheels, which is a very similar proposition in many ways. So first, against the Ioniq, we look at the typical efficiency as a function of the average speed of a trip segment. And you can see there is a distribution, but typically a trip that would have 50-60 kilometers an hour is kind of optimal for efficiency. And that's for most cars, in fact, not just EVs. So what do we see here? There is a 20 to 25% increase in consumption on the BMW iX1 compared to the Ioniq. So that's interesting, and it could well be that when the speeds are higher, that the consumption and the difference increases, and that could be due to the shape in particular of the car. Now, against the Kona 19-inch wheels, you can see a very similar distribution of outcomes, and I would argue they are probably in the same category of efficiency. Again, both of them are 19-inch wheels. Irrespective of which car you get, I would always recommend going for the smaller wheels unless you have some really good reason why you would decline the better efficiency. It's now the final chapter where we consider how much a difference in efficiency has an impact on your wallet. Let's start with the reference car, and these numbers are inspired by actual consumption, actual measurements. So 23p per kilowatt hours, you can achieve that on a 50-50 mix between cheap overnight home energy and loads of motorway charging, but looking for the best rates and maybe having some subscriptions. So clearly that's what I'm doing, and I get 22p per kilowatt hours these days, which is still very good. Now, if you've got an efficient car like the Ioniq 28, you'll get to 130 watt hours per kilometer on average. That's the displayed consumption in the car. But by the time you look at your efficiency net of any losses, any wall-to-wall charging efficiencies, you're down to 4 miles per kilowatt hours. Let's say you do 10,000 miles per year, and you have a depreciation, insurance, all other costs of $350 per month. Now, I think we're going to get loads of comments because that number is a bit arbitrary and it could vary quite a lot. But I don't think it's too bad a number, depending on whether you're leasing your car or there was quite a bit of amortisation. Of course, it could vary a lot, and we'll talk about that in a second. Well, in that case, you're spending £47 per month on energy, and that is therefore 12% of your overall spend, which is about £400. That's the reference. So the first question is, if you get this iX1 and you consume 25% more, how much more are you really spending? And of course, that would become £59 from £47. Okay, now that is not massive, right? That's £12 more. You could argue for some it might make a difference. I would argue if you can afford a car and you spend what you spend on all the other costs of the car, it's probably actually a bit of a rounding error, 14% of the overall spend, which is now $410. But of course, depending on your conditions for charging the car, this might vary quite a bit more than that. It could be that you never use the car to go on the motorway or go long distances because you got those 200 miles of range. You can do a lot of stuff by just charging from home. And that's what many people are going to be doing. In that case, you're in fact having a less efficient car, but you're actually spending less money because your mix is much more based on charging at home. In fact, I'm not even talking about those who charge with their solar panels for supposedly no cost at all. I mean, there's always an opportunity cost, of course. And then you've got the 50p per kilowatt hours mark, which gives you a completely different picture. Suddenly you're spending about 130 pounds per month, and that's 27% of your overall spend. And at an extreme, if you're going to be using it mostly on DC charging and you're not looking for the best prices, and they can vary a lot, we have to admit to that, then suddenly it becomes about a third of your spend, right? But of course, the benchmark was 14% if you had like-for-like condition on the per kilowatt hours electricity prices. But that's not the end of the story. Of course, the other thing that might vary is if you're using the car, again, for work commutes, that kind of stuff, you drop the kids at school and you do 5,000 miles per year, you're looking at 30 pounds of spend on, I think, the best part of 400 pounds, given your leasing of the car, given your cost of amortization, depending on how you've purchased that car. So in a low mileage scenario, this is only 8% of the total spend on electricity. So efficiency is interesting. And of course, there's plenty of good reasons to be efficient, but it's not the be all and end all of the costs in any case. And then conversely, if you're going to do 15,000 miles a year, of course, it's now 20% of your overall spend. But the elephant in the room is really how much you're really spending in terms of having the ability to use this car, right? It could be that some of you would totally discount any of the costs, the per month cost of either amortization if you bought the car, or actually the lease car. For some reason, someone else is paying that for you and you've got minimal cost, maybe 50 pounds, maybe £0. Well, in that case, your £12 increase on electricity may sound like a bit of money. I mean, of course, it has become the main part of your spend when it comes to having the car. I would argue this is maybe how people think, but this is not the reality. I think the reality is you'd be extremely well positioned if you were to spend £250 per month on a car. Any car, by the way, and this is not the whole petrol versus electricity as in EV, but it is just the fact that if you've got a leasing deal at £250 and it's all inclusive, including the insurance and that kind of stuff, you are extremely well positioned compared to what most people would get. In that case, yes, you're spending 20% of your money on electricity, but that's still a small fraction of total cost of ownership for the car. And then conversely, if you're spending maybe £500 on the car per month, and that could be quite likely if you're getting something like an iX1, it's supposed to be a bit more premium, so you're probably spending that bit more. It has more depreciation over time in terms of absolute number. In that case, you're probably spending something like 11%. Now, finally, let's look at a couple of what I think are realistic scenarios. Maybe you got your iX1 on a leasing deal. Maybe it's your second car even. Maybe it's the car for one of the two folks in the home. You're going to use it as a commuter car and you've got the off-street parking and you're charging overnight. Well, you're spending very little on electricity. The electricity is probably then just 5% of the spend. So having a less efficient car is actually just, again, from a pure money perspective, not the decision factor. There can be loads of reasons why you'd want more efficient car, but that's actually not the main reason here. It's not going to be about cost. A second typical usage, I think, is maybe a car that it's a couple of years old, let's say, and it's your main car, so you drive 10,000 miles a year, and you do a mix with this kind of a bit of motorway charging and a bit of home charging, or you try to optimize a little bit. Well, in that case, it's still 18% of your overall spend of 427 per month, in which case that is actually having a bit of a difference in terms of having this less efficient car, of course. And then finally, and that's maybe the case, the only case where this wouldn't be quite recommended is you're doing a lot of miles a year. Maybe you're using it as a company car and you cannot really select where you're going to be charging and it's costing you 50p. Now, in that case, 26% of your spend is on electricity, and therefore having this less efficient car is probably going to be not only more costly but also less effective, because you end up charging a bit more than you should, having all those business trips. Right, so I think that gives us a bunch of scenarios, and I think my main conclusion for all of this is that if you're looking at the iX1 for your first electric car because you are saying, well, it's a good time to change, I wouldn't worry too much about the efficiency. I would worry about whether actually it's too big a car, it's too heavy a car, maybe it has too many carbon emissions, in fact, at the start because it's made with way too much metal and steel and all of that. But I'm not sure that the efficiency is actually the main issue here of this car, especially if you're going to be using it locally. If conversely you're coming from another electric car, maybe a Tesla, maybe an infamous Ioniq, you're probably going to be struggling on a day-to-day looking at those numbers, but I'm not sure it will be because of the impact on your wallet. Right? So I think that's the conclusion for this car and this video. There are other videos about this car, so make sure you check them out. And I'll catch you soon. Thanks for watching.